Hello and welcome to Cracking Culture Change. My name is Ella and today we're going to think about the following topic, being bold with remote working to deliver your strategy. My guest today is Harriet Oppenheimer, Deputy CEO of RNID, a charity who have been supporting people that are deaf or have hearing loss for more than 100 years. I was keen to talk to Harriet because RNID moved to digital working, which is how they refer to remote working, not just because of the pandemic, but as a more fundamental part of their strategy. This bold approach is interesting and something I wanted to explore. I hope you enjoy the episode and I'll catch up with you with my reflections at the end. Harriet, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
And thank you. It's great to be here.
So I'm interested to hear a little bit about the kind of potted history of RNID, if you like, because I understand that the imperative for you to move to total remote working is wider than just what happened during the pandemic.
Yes, absolutely. So RNID has been around for a long time. We're a heritage brand. We've been around for 111 years. We are the Royal Institute for people who are deaf, have hearing loss or tinnitus. But we're now beginning a new chapter in our life, which is about reach and impact right the way across the UK. There are 12 million people in the UK who are deaf or have hearing loss or tinnitus. And our move to being digital is really born of a strategic imperative to reach 12 million people, which you can't do in person. And so that imperative, that decision, that strategy did predate the pandemic. Interestingly, I actually think that the pandemic helped us. I mean, obviously the pandemic was a very complex time and there were a lot of tragedies and very difficult things that came out of it, but there were also lots of opportunities and innovation that came out of it. And through the pandemic, we learned that we could be online. And so we made our decision, actually, once we'd gone online through the pandemic, to close our offices, and we didn't reopen them. So we have become a fully digital charity through the pandemic.
It's a very interesting take on remote working, I think, in that by working remotely from each other, you have actually become closer to those that you serve.
I think that's a really nice way of putting it. I mean, we see our sort of strategic imperative, the at-reach digital one, like we can't reach 12 million people personally. But you're right. I think if we were sitting in an office together, then we'd sort of be treating ourselves differently from how we treat our communities. And I don't think that's right at all. And in fact, one of our four values as an organization is connected. And we see ourselves, connected is about how we work with each other. It's about how we work with our communities right the way across the UK. It's about how we work with external partners. And I think that you can be really connected wherever you are. And I think we have to be if we want to reach, an audience as large as ours.
And connected, again, is something that I think lots of organisations are still working out, how to be connected when they're spending significantly less time physically together. How have you gone about living that connected value, I guess, getting more connected in a digital way of working?
It's a great question. So as I describe RNID, we've kind of got two modes. And in many ways, the obvious thing to talk about is the fact that we've gone to a fully digital, remote, home-based way of working. So, almost all of our jobs, not quite all of them, but almost all of them are UK-wide and therefore can be done by anyone anywhere across the UK. And part of the way we want to be relevant and represent our communities is go where they are. So if our communities are UK-wide, then we need to be UK-wide as well. And digital really gives us that opportunity. It's really flexible. You can talk to anybody anywhere. The people that I work closest with are quite literally in all four corners of the UK. And I can talk to them every day really easily. And I can talk to them in groups every day because we can all join together. So that's totally part of who we are. Flexible, agile, digital organisation. But it would be ridiculous to suggest that people don't need some in-person physical contact as well. So the way that we do that is we come together, the whole charity, 3 times a year for what we call staff summits, and they're residential, so they're a kind of overnight 2-day affair. And I don't know, that they're everything. We call them our cultural anchor. So it's an opportunity to meet each other, to learn together, to learn about what we're doing internally, to have some skills exchange, to listen to external speakers and understand what's going on in the outside world. And then also just to kind of network and spend some really good quality time together. And I kind of think that we work really hard at being digital, and we also work really hard at being in person. They're both true. And I don't really think that either works without the other, for all that obviously we spend much more of our time being remote from each other than we do being in person, because we do that 3 times a year. But it has a tremendous impact. And I think our people feel that it's as much a core part of who we are and how we are as working remotely is.
And how did you go about deciding what to do in person and what to do digitally? And was there any learning in that as you've gone through the last couple of years?
Oh, that's a great question. So we are still learning. So yes, we have learned, and we are totally still on a journey. I think that when we started, there were more things that we thought we'd do in person, because we thought that those were going to be really important conversations with lots of information, and where we were going to kind of have big conversations and take important decisions. I think that often those are the ones that are easiest to do remotely, because if you're making a lot of decisions that need you to kind of look at some financial data and some workforce data and know where our capacity is and all of the things that we do. Frankly, we've all got used to working with screens, and I'm sitting here in front of you with 2 screens, and that means I can look at an awful lot of information at the same time. So I think that in many ways, those are the conversations that are easiest to have remotely. What we're tending to do in person, we've got a mixture of an opportunity to hear from the leadership and some sort of more, if you like, broadcast messages, but where people want to hear from the leaders, they want to hear what's happening. We absolutely want everybody to be up on stage. So we've got a good opportunity for, kind of a mixed group of people to be in panels that everybody can hear, so you've got lots of different perspectives from across the organisation, giving their views and their ideas and their news about what's happening. We use it as an opportunity to think a bit about what's coming up next in the charity, and sort of do some workshops where we've got an opportunity to kind of mix people up together and have some sort of brainstorming time. We literally use it as an opportunity to learn together. So we have some sessions which are skills exchanges. So some parts of the organisation which have got some specialist skills will share it with other parts of the organisation. And then we have external speakers. So we've got a time where we all learn together, and we listen to other people who come and give their time to RNID and, share their stories with us as well.
Very nice. And did you sort of get straight into that, or has that evolved over time, how you've used that time together?
It's definitely evolved. And part of that evolution is actually coming out of the pandemic. So the first one of these that we ran was in September 2021. So we were really just newly coming out of the pandemic then, and it felt quite a big deal to be bringing everybody together. And that one we didn't run as a residential, so we ran it within a day, and we had about 4 hours of really good quality time together. But because we're right the way across the UK, the travel time, the balance between the travel time and the time together was a bit crazy. But it was really important that we did it, because it was sort of our first time of doing it, and we learned that we could do it, and we learned a lot more from it. And the summits that we've had since then have been, we've evolved from there, and they've been much more similar to each other. Understanding how it works for us to be overnight and have the opportunity for an evening meal and some good collaboration and networking time together. We've certainly learned quite a lot about just the sheer administration of how to run such a thing, because we're not an event company. Like, that's not what our core skill is. And neither, but we have decided, for both financial reasons and actually for cultural reasons, that we want to run our own summits. So we haven't outsourced this to a conference organizer. So we're definitely learning a lot each time about just the practicalities and then the administration of how to run an event for about 150 people.
Mm. Lovely. I can really see how the time invested in those then sort of fuels the relationships through your digital working the rest of the time. What have the biggest challenges been? I know that you have some feelings about language and the language that's used around remote working.
I do, and maybe this is a particular personal thing. I think that we've got to go on an evolution, not just RNID, but all of us, about how we talk about ways of working. I don't really like remote or home-based, and I don't really like in person, because I don't think any of them really describe the kind of the richness of the new ways of working that I think actually everybody's experiencing now since the pandemic. I think with digital, I think that's probably a good way to describe it. But remote always sounds, well, it sounds a bit remote and impersonal. And home-based sounds a little bit unprofessional, maybe. I don't know. It doesn't quite work for me. And in-person feels a bit of a kind of technical way to describe what it means to actually physically spend time in each other's company together. So I think we all need to get a bit better at describing that. I do. RNID does, but I think the whole country does. So what have been some of the things that have been difficult? Well, I think the reality is that everybody will make their own choices about how they want to work. I think one of the great things about being in work now is that different organisations have got different approaches. And I think the important thing for everybody is to work out what works for them. So we have definitely had some people who have made the decision that our way of working, digital and in-person together summits, isn't for them, because they want an office to be more part of their daily or weekly life. And that's totally fine, because they should find the thing that really works for them. I think actually we're finding that this is much more of a draw for us in the recruitment market than anything else, which is great. So we, I think every organisation every organisation will always experience some turnover, and there's certainly quite a lot of turnover in the market at the moment, in the recruitment market. And we've got our share of it. I don't think we've got more than others, but what I'm really excited about is that we don't have posts that we're struggling to fill. We've got a lot of people who have come to us because we've got a big ambition, a big social purpose strategy, and we've got flexible ways of working that mean you can do really exciting jobs anywhere in the UK. So I think that's a good thing for us rather than a learning. We're definitely still learning how to explain it to people. I think we're learning a lot about how to use the tools that we've got. So, early on in our journey, we made proper investment in laptops and in making sure everyone's got the right technology. And you've got to make your decision about what you're going to do about kind of which platforms you're going to use. So we've chosen Microsoft. There are other choices. Microsoft works well for us. So whether it's Teams or SharePoint or all the different things that you can use, but just getting people to work out what they're going to use, how they're going to use it, what you email about, what you put in your Teams chats, what you save for your monthly staff calls. That's all interesting, and that's all a learning. We know that we're on a journey about celebrating louder and better and harder. We're doing lots of great things and we want to shout about them. I think it's sometimes easy to get a bit focused on what you're doing in the moment, and I think we all need to get better at celebrating our successes and celebrating them with all of our staff. I hope we're doing a lot better than that, but we can always do more. And I think so another thing that I think we're on a bit of a journey with, I love inducting new staff. So we have a monthly staff induction meeting, where I have the pleasure of welcoming people from across the UK, and sort of going across my screen is literally quite often like a map of the UK. I really enjoy it. And I think that's a really strong staff induction, because the thing about being digital is you can be anywhere. So almost always with our staff inductions, you'll find that they have the full suite of their senior leaders talking to them on their induction day, because you can always find half an hour to call into an induction meeting wherever you are. I've even done it when I was abroad on holiday, not because I'm a slave to my laptop, but because it's such fun. I didn't actually want to miss the opportunity. So I think that works really well. I think that's a really nice thing. I'm sure that we need to work a little bit more about the sort of ongoing onboarding of people beyond that, because I recognise that it's a new way of working. And we've also, as well as going sort of digital and in person, we've also adopted a very matrix way of working. So we've got big strategic programs, and we've got all of our people in big capability teams. So the people live in the capabilities, not in the programs. And to deliver the programs, you kind of take people from all of the different capabilities across. And that's great. It's very digital, it's very agile, and it works really well with remote working. But it is new. I think to be honest, it's new in most sectors. It's definitely new in the charity sector. And we're quite proud of that. We're quite proud to be pioneers, and I think we're enjoying being pioneers. But it does mean that there's not a blueprint to learn from. So we're doing a lot of kind of working out our new ways of working as we go. It means that everybody gets to be part of designing our future, which is really exciting. But it definitely means that we're on a journey.
It's interesting here you describe the different aspects around, getting the digital bit working and getting the togetherness bit working. And you've learned now how best to use your time when you're together, and how that helps, and then getting the basics right around digital, platforms, but then making sure, investing time to make sure everyone knows how to use them properly, which on one level sounds really simple, but I think it's something that often gets missed when you were saying, what do we use team channels for? When we're communicating, what do we communicate? What do we report, and what have you? I wanted to just come back to something else you said about, which I think is really useful in being, it sounds like you're confident as an organisation on what your model is. And not relax is probably too strong a word, but okay with the fact that that won't be what some people are looking for, and they need to choose a workplace that is, more office based, or never requires them to travel anywhere, or what have you. That feels like a very grown up approach, if that's not too patronizing a phrase. But how, what's involved in being able to have those kind of grown up conversations with people? The reason I ask is that I think in some situations, leaders still feel a bit stuck in trying to be all things to all people. We had a huge focus on well-being during the pandemic, and rightly so, and making sure people were okay. And now, as we get into sort of huge change agendas and really trying to come out of the pandemic, there's this sort of, to what extent are we working on the organisation's agenda, and to what extent are we working on individuals' agenda, and that tricky line between the two. So yeah, there's a question in there somewhere. How have you gone about having those grown-up conversations with people and helping people in your teams be able to do that?
There's a lot in there, isn't there? Well, let me start with how we made the decision. You're totally right. It was a very deliberate, intentional decision. And we aren't trying to be all things to all people. We're sub 200 people. And the set of offices, we had like a portfolio of offices across the UK, and they were just subscale. So even if we'd wanted to, I just don't think it could have worked. We didn't have enough people to put in them. And if we'd wanted to go hybrid, then you've got even less sort of business case to keep them open. Where do you put your offices if you're telling people that they can live if you're telling people that they can live anywhere? So I think there was a very good business case for it. And then we made the decision, you could say quite boldly, quite intentionally, we don't need to we can't employ everybody because we don't have enough money to. We're the size we are. We're sub 200, and we want the people to come to us who really want to work like this. And that does mean making a quite clear decision about what our employee brand is, what our employee proposition is, and sharing that and showing that to the employment market and saying, if this excites you, that's great, come here. if this isn't what will work for you, then you should absolutely go and find the place that does work for you. And I think we have, taken that decision, quite deliberately and taken it on. And I think all organisations coming out of the pandemic have had a bit of a, so throughout the pandemic, rightly, every organisation was focused entirely on the welfare of their people, as well as what it was going to take to keep them strategically afloat. And certainly if you're an organisation like ours with a social purpose, how we could reach the people who depended on us through the pandemic. But I think things have shifted since then, and more normal ways of working and have recovered since the pandemic. But I think the conversation between RNID and our employees, I think we do try to have quite a kind of, you use the word grown up, conversation with our people. I think that one of our learnings, and you could say that this is one of the challenges, but I also think it's one of the opportunities of going remote, is that I think people have to manage their own boundaries quite a lot. So you could find that you're quite overwhelmed with work because one meeting follows another meeting, follows another meeting, and you never get any time for you, and you can't work out when you fit your lunch break in, and it's all quite overwhelming, and you have too much screen time and you don't have time to think. And of course, that is a logical consequence that could happen. And I think that we are encouraging our staff to have flexibility, to manage their own time. So we have got rid of core hours. We don't have core hours, and we encourage people to make the most of what their own lives are alongside their work lives and how to make that balance. We absolutely expect people to work sort of committedly and hard. And my sense is that people really want to, because people are excited by a big ambition and a strong social purpose. But how people, what different people need, whether it's a bit of time during the day, or they've got kids that they pick up from school, or they have a particular work pattern that really suits them, we're really happy to accommodate that. But I think it has got to start with the individual to think about what works for them and their boundaries. And I think we rely on people to be resilient, and to think about their own wellness and what works for them. And sort of the quid pro quo is we provide the right environment, and I think and I hope a kind of encouraging, engaged, really committed leadership, and team leaders who will always work with their people about what works best for them. But it's got to be a bit of a give and take between the organisation and the individual. And I do think that you need to be responsible for your own resilience. I think that's probably true in any organisation, but I do think that working remotely probably adds to that. I think that we are a values-based, caring organisation. I think it's actually pretty easy to pick up the phone to anybody at any point and reach out. So I don't think it's about being isolated, but I think it is about taking responsibility for what you need.
Yeah, and making that known if you're not getting that.
Yeah, totally.
And I've go on. Sorry.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I think one of my personal learnings about leading in this way is that it's actually quite immediate, because in the same way that you and I are talking now on screen, if somebody comes to you with a question, you're right there. And we have our monthly all staff meetings, and we openly encourage people to ask us any question they want to, whether it's in those staff meetings or in one-to-ones afterwards. We're all pretty easy to get hold of. I think that in many ways, being digital is quite sort of democratic and egalitarian. We've all got each other's email addresses, and we can all get in touch with each other on Teams. So I feel that when people, my personal experience has been, people have asked me some quite big questions, sometimes some quite hard questions. And actually there's nowhere to hide when you're leading digitally and remotely. I may be in my home, which might be many hundreds of miles from somebody else's home, but there's me and a screen and you. And I think the conversation is actually very immediate.
Yes. And closer, actually, perhaps, than you may have had if you were in a slightly formal setting in an office. It's about, I love what you're saying. For me, it's about the relationship that you can build almost regardless of whether you're on a screen or sat next to each other.
Yes.
It's the quality of relationship.
My personal journey with RNID, I joined during lockdown. So I left my previous organisation remotely and I joined RNID remotely. And although all of the people that I now line manage, I have now met them in person and enjoyed doing so, the relationships that I formed with them are most definitely on screen, because that's where I've had all my one-to-one time with them. And it's the one-to-one time where you form really deep relationships. And I haven't found it an impediment.
What if you talked about gains and losses earlier on, and there've been gains and there've been losses to moving to this way of working. What has the impact been? What have the gains been? What have the losses been?
It's really interesting. So one thing I want to say about gains, which I think is really important for us in particular, is that actually digital working done right can be brilliant for people who are deaf or have hearing loss or tinnitus, because you are in your space and you have your tech set up as you need it. It doesn't mean to say that we don't have to work hard at it, because we do. And you were talking earlier about how to make the best use of the different IT tools, the different platforms, the different ways to engage digitally. We've worked really hard at making our communications accessible. I know we've got further to go, because we always will have, but I think we are reasonably good at making sure that we've always got captions on everything, that we have BSL translators on screen just the same as whoever they're translating is on screen, that we think quite carefully about when we use the chat bar, because it's really helpful too, and when we don't use the chat bar because it's distracting if you're trying to listen to what's happening on screen. And that's particularly helpful if you've got hearing loss, but actually it's probably helpful for everybody. I think we've all been in the experience where you're in a multimedia meeting and you've got stuff coming from you everywhere. So I think that's a kind of universal experience. But I do think that working remotely has got big benefits for accessible, inclusive communication if you get it right. And I think that hybrid meetings are actually a real challenge. I have been to some well-run hybrid meetings, but they usually take a lot of much more expensive tech to really get to a place where everybody is included in the conversation equally. So I think that's one important thing to say. I think the other thing I'd say is that, funnily enough, I think what you gain and what you lose or don't have are quite different. I don't think they're the same as each other. So some of the things that you don't have, like you can't, you and I can both choose to go and get a cup of tea at the same time and sit there eating them together, drinking them together, but I can't make you a birthday cake, or, we're not going to share a meal. And if if I leave, you're not going to come to my leaving do, because that's not going to be possible if, I live in Northern Ireland and you live in Scotland, or, whatever it is. So there's definitely things that don't happen. And I think it's important to acknowledge them, not least because we need to find other things to replace them. I think quite often they're ritual things that don't happen, and we need to find other things that replace those rituals. The gains, I think, that we've had, as I say, that there's a lot about who wants to come and work here, and how far we can reach out across the UK, both because I think that helps us recruit amazing, brilliant people, which we have. I'm impressed and inspired by the caliber and brilliance of the people who are coming and joining us, but also because if we've got a UK wide workforce, that helps us be representative and kind of engaging with the UK wide 12 million people who are deaf or have hearing loss or tinnitus, and that's totally our purpose. So that's a big gain, and I do think that there's a lot of efficiency and flexibility in how we work as well.
And how has that shown itself, the efficiency and flexibility?
Well, for example, I often find that people are taking their own notes during meetings, and when people are referring to another document, they'll probably just put it in the chat bar so that people can refer to the document as they're going. I think in a physical meeting, because of course I've spent my professional life in physical meetings and I'm still in them sometimes. I think it's probably much easier to find yourself referring to some information you haven't quite got at your fingertips. And therefore a few more follow-up actions that need to happen afterwards. And I think we do a lot less of that. And in terms of flexibility, I mean, you can call people into meetings whenever you like, and you can sort of check in their diary and see if they're there. And you can call people in irrespective of where they live or which teams they're in, because we're all on the same platform.
Yeah. Much more agile, as you say, actually. And it sounds like the way you describe it, more responsibility, people getting the information they need collectively to make decisions or to collaborate or create. What for organisations who are perhaps a little further behind on their journey to moving to a more remote way of working, what would your number one tip be from all of your learning so far?
Oh, number one is very difficult because that makes me prioritise. I might not quite be able to restrict it to one. I'd certainly start off by saying be intentional and do it for all of the right reasons. I think it's not we can't afford our offices, or it's a bit of a waste of money, is not a good enough reason to go remote. So I think you have to really inhabit that space and build a positive, exciting, valuable and valued reason for being part of an organisation. It's definitely true that we've saved a lot of money by closing our offices, and that's really important for us because we're a charity, so that's money that we can spend on our charitable purpose. But I kind of think that's a hygiene factor. I'm much more excited by what we've created. So I think being really intentional about what you're creating is really important. And I am also going to say, even though you only told me I could say one thing, I'm going to say two. I'm going to say that however intentional you are, you won't get it all right at the beginning, and we're totally learning. And I also think it just takes time to bed in new ways of working. So, of course, if you're going to come together 3 times a year or whatever is right for your particular organisation, you're going to want to tell people a long time in advance. But when you first start doing it, you're not going to know a long time in advance. And it may sound like a really silly, obvious, simple thing, but the kind of just the administration of dates and venues and bookings and diaries and calendars and how much you need to do things in advance. You don't move overnight or even in 6 months from one way to another way, because I think really when we look back, we'll probably find that we moved into a steady rhythm over a space of maybe 3 years. We haven't got to the end of that 3 years yet.
Yeah. So keep learning, keep iterating, keep learning, and be okay with that. Don't expect to get it right immediately.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
And be intentional. Yeah. Lovely. Build something that people want to come to. I love that whole spirit to what you're doing.
I think it's important because it's got to be exciting. And it's got to be a draw. And in fact, I found that one of the great things about it is people just want to talk to us about it from different walks of life and different organisations and different sectors, because it is new. And we're not the only organisation that's doing it, but I think most organisations that have gone digital still have some form of office space and something. And maybe it's only like 1 day a week or something. So one of the things I'm finding exciting is talking to people from different sectors and different organisations to just share learnings and find out what they're doing, because between us we'll get somewhere better.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for sharing your learnings today. That's been really lovely to listen to and insightful. Thank you very much.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
I found that conversation with Harriet inspiring in the context of us working increasingly remotely from each other. I love how bold, how strategic RNID have been in moving, as she describes, to digital working. No more head offices, choosing to close them, and actually feeling more connected as a result to the people that they are serving. because everyone's in the same boat. Nobody is in a room together or in a building together. A really standout part of our conversation, albeit a small point, was the importance of language. And this phrase, digital working rather than remote working, really resonates strongly with me. It conjures up a whole different image of how we work and why we do it this way, and shifts mindsets, I think, in a different way to the phrase remote working. I also really got how hard they have worked on the way they spend time together, what they do in person, what they do digitally, but always with a focus on the quality of relationships that they're building. And the last thing that really struck me was how bold they are in being clear on this is how we work, and attracting people who really want that. And people who have what it takes to work successfully in a digital way, whether that's about managing your own boundaries, making good use of the time you spend together. But I love the fact that they've taken a stand and are clear about that in how they recruit and attract people to the organisation. So thank you very much to Harriet. If you need help to crack your culture, get in touch, podcast@pcampartnership.co.uk. Please do subscribe, leave us a review on Apple or Spotify, or if you've watched us on YouTube, drop a question or comment into the comments section. Thank you.